Well, I'm ready whenever you are.
Dear Matthew, I'm very happy that you found time. Since you're super busy at the American Center of Research, formerly known as American Center of Oriental Studies, what do you think about the new name? According to my information, Jack Green renamed the center. It was his idea that American Center of Research would be more politically correct. And he himself is very politically correct and very diplomatic guy. So I'm not surprised that he came with a new coin, with a new name for the institute. And of course, you're not a new guy in Jordan. You've been coming and working here in the Middle East for maybe 15 and so years. And one of the projects that we're going to discuss is the Mosul project. Everybody knows about Mosul because of the civil war, sectarian war in Iraq. How challenging was to work on such a project in Iraq?
Well, first off, thank you so much for having me on here as well. It's an absolute pleasure. We've had many discussions offline as well, but it's nice to be able to do this in a slightly more formal setting. And before I get into Mosul as well, I mean, let me drop my commentary on the new name for the center. We've seen the same thing happen with ASOR, with the what used to be the American Schools of Oriental Research, and
Yeah.
now it's just simply the American Schools of Research or of Overseas Research. And I get it. I understand it. There's a lot of negative connotations to the idea of Orientalists, Orientalism, and these sort of conceptions. I don't have any problem with the changing of the name, but of course, there's also, you know, how many years and years and decades that these names have been around, and it always takes a while to kind of refresh yourself and remind yourself that it's still the same institution, still the same people.
Yeah.
And it doesn't erase the past of those names. It doesn't erase the past of the work they've done. But it's still important to remember that it's good to keep moving on from these sorts of things. But getting into Mosul, so you know the reality is that technology plays an incredibly important role today in all things related to cultural heritage. And the entire project, what originally started off as Project Mosul and later became RECRE, the project began as a crowdsourced response to the destruction that we were seeing in the Mosul Museum. And we were very fortunate that there had been a group of military personnel, and I think UNESCO was involved with it as well, that had gone in to assess damage at heritage sites across Iraq, fairly early on before the occupation of Daesh in Mosul. So there was quite a few pictures that we were able to work with, and they were very happy to donate those to us. And of course, there was a huge and enthusiastic response from the community to get involved with such projects. And I think the difficulties lie in the fact that, yeah, a lot of times you can't access these places. You can't get into them. It's not like I could say, oh, let's just pop over to the museum and grab a few pictures and digitize this particular artifact. Once something's lost, you're completely dependent on whatever pictures people may or may not have taken. And so, for example, we look at like the digitization of the Lion of Mosul. It's impartial, and it's like, yeah, its twin is in the British Museum. You can go to the British Museum, you could see exactly how this thing should have looked. But what's there in Mosul, it's gone. And what we have from photographs lets us digitize 2/3 of it at most, more like half, if not a third. So it's incredibly challenging to recover these sorts of things once they've been lost.
What was the security situation at that time? We're talking about 2015. We know that
Yeah.
Daesh was still functioning as a de facto state on the territory of Iraq and Syria. They had their ministries, they had their institutions, they were paying salaries, they were implementing a very strict Hanbali Sharia. How challenging it was for you and your team?
Well, I mean, again, like the nice thing about a project like this is that we're not actually confronted with the security of it because, it's something
Yeah.
that can entirely happen remotely. But at the same time, where it does become challenging is that the people most positioned to contribute to a project like this are going to be the people there, particularly with Mosul, because the Mosul Museum unfortunately suffered from the idea of the digital camera revolution, as I've called it before, and have unfortunately been mocked for calling it that too. But the digital camera revolution changed how we photograph things.
Yeah.
And the reality is that you might have a tourist who goes into a site and they're got 36 or 24 snaps on a camera. They're not just taking pictures of everything. The moment we had digital cameras, people are suddenly like taking hundreds of photos of the same thing because you can just delete what you don't want, and it's really easy and it's very accessible. But of course, the Mosul Museum itself was closed since 2003 after the American-led invasion of Iraq, so it wasn't accessible to the public. And it was only the UNESCO personnel, and I'm trying to remember exactly when they went in. I think it was around 2013, so about a year before the occupation of the city by Daesh. And, so fortunately they were able to go in and of course had digital cameras. So we're taking plenty of pictures. But Palmyra, on the other hand, it's a very different example where there was still quite a bit of active tourism and fortunately benefiting from the access to digital cameras. So you have a lot of people who are going in, taking many, many pictures across the site, and it made it easy to be able to recreate some of the structures that were lost to Daesh's activities there.
How Mosul Museum was vandalized and looted before the emergence of Daesh. Daesh emerged in 2013, 2014, but
Mm-hmm.
long before Daesh emergence, situation in Iraq was very unstable, and we witnessed a very brutal sectarian civil war.
Yeah. It seems that the Mosul Museum was fortunate in the sense that a lot of the artifacts that had been there, were either already taken away to secure locations, and primarily what was left were the really large pieces that weren't exactly easy to move, such as the Lamastu and the lion relief that we see in the museum. There were other things mounted on walls and things like that, but it didn't seem like the museum had particularly suffered from looting or violence, versus some of the others like the Baghdad Museum and some of the things that we saw in there. So fortunately, Mosul had escaped a lot of that, but then, suffered on the other hand in 2015 when Daesh went in and just literally destroyed everything in there. Anything they couldn't move, they took jackhammers to or sledgehammers to. And, we see just kind of like this incredibly graphic destruction of a museum.
What are your plans in coming period regarding the Mosul project? Now the Daesh is in retreat. The arrival of Daesh happened 9 years ago, and how feasible it is to revitalize the museum in Mosul.
Mm-hmm. There's many, many people who are taking active parts now in the restoration of Mosul and all of the cultural heritage in the area. I believe the Louvre is actively involved with the Mosul Museum itself. Of course, there's huge questions of what will it look like afterwards.
Yeah.
And I have to take a step back and I have to say, like, one of the most incredible things to see was the revitalizing of the Royal Hall. So the Mosul Museum as it stands today is mostly the big modern museum that was built later on, I think, in the 50s or 60s. The original museum that predates that was what we now call the Royal Hall. And this was completely revitalized by local Moslawis in 2019 and 2000, well, end of 2018 and up into the very beginning of 2019 for an art exhibition that they did called The Return to Mosul. And one of the most incredible things I've ever been to, one of the most incredible things I've ever seen. And it was amazing local ingenuity that restored that hall and made it what it is today. Local labor, local work, and it was almost Lowies who, put together art boards where they didn't have any before. They came up with a plan to set up LED lights over every single one of the art pieces that was there. That's so even in the case of a power outage, which there most likely would be, that those lights would continue running and keep working. So I have to say, the Moslawis themselves are going to make the biggest impact on recreating, rebuilding, and reestablishing Mosul as it should be. And we can already see that with what they already did there in the Mosul Museum. But other than that, the reality is that today it's incredibly difficult to work in Mosul because everyone wants to do something there. You have a lot of very big heritage companies and heritage organizations that are trying to pitch in and do something about Mosul and make it what they think it ought to be. But I think at the end of the day, like, it's important to listen to the local voices as well and make sure that they have room to participate and guide the efforts that are happening in Mosul.
Can you tell us more about your role at ACOR? You got the post of a National Inventory Project co-director. I can't remember when Barbara was in charge of ACOR whether that post existed or not. I can't remember that there was a National Inventory Project co-director. So,
yeah,
go ahead.
This is a very new project.
Exactly.
So, I think, yeah, people have dreamed about this sort of thing, and we know that there have been efforts from like the German Institute and what they created with DOJAM. But the reality is we're doing a slightly different shift with things. So the National Inventory Project is funded by the U.S. State Department. So there's about $2.3 million, if I remember correctly, that they're dedicating to this effort. And really the idea is that we are creating a national catalog of all the artifacts in the country. And we foresee this as being something that will really improve the way that we work with heritage. So, you imagine, for example, we got an excavation happening out in the field. People are producing lists of artifacts. They're uncovering the things that they have there, and then they're turning those over to the Department of Antiquities. Oftentimes, they're turning out a printed sheet with names of artifacts and registration numbers and everything else, which then have to be entered into a database all over again. And why not have something that's centralized, and why not have something that makes it really easy to say, okay, like, we have a box of artifacts that is in Tababur in the central storage, and now needs to go back to Kerak for whatever reason, because that's where the excavations were, and all they need to do is click a couple things in the system and move it. And we made the decision to go with commercial off-the-shelf software. We're using Axial Collections, which is a very well-known, well-founded, well-established organization. And, people like the Louvre are using it, and the Smithsonian. I think the National Archives in the US as well use it. So it's a big organization, big software, and one that we, expect to see working for a very long time. And I suspect that our biggest challenge really is just changing how we work today. So, when we're in a paper-based system, the way we work is we go to the shelf, we get the piece that we need to work with, we may take some notes in that system, and we just go and put that piece back. But when we're working with these electronics systems, every movement needs to be recorded, every movement needs to be noted. And that suddenly becomes a new way of working. And it's training people to adopt that mindset and embrace that mindset, with the idea that the trade-off will be huge, because in the future, we'll always know exactly where every single artifact is at. We'll have history of everything that needs to be done with it. Anytime there's an intervention, we have it there. And so all of a sudden, we have that ability to really understand the collection here in Jordan that we just simply can't do when we're either using databases spread across the country or paper forms or whatever else. By having it centralized and contained in one place, we can have a snapshot view of everything that's happening here. It's an absolute must next step, not only for managing our heritage here, but also having the opportunity to really help prevent things like the illicit trafficking of antiquities. By having that database where authorities can consult it, people like Interpol or the FBI in the United States, having that opportunity to tap into this database and say, we found something in customs that we think may belong to the Kingdom of Jordan. And being able to consult these databases to do that comparative research will be fundamental to helping to prevent these sort of situations.
How big is the problem of illicit trafficking of artifacts and objects from this part of the world?
I mean, I would say it's probably bigger than we all suspect sometimes. It's not my area of expertise, so I don't know all the ins and outs of it. I don't know all of the numbers and the exact details. But as an archaeologist, I can tell you, we see sites vandalized all the time. And we know that there's enough demand or enough, kind of excitement around the idea that if you get something out of the ground, you can make money off of it. Colleagues like Morag Kursel has done a lot of work on, things moving across from Jordan into Jerusalem, into the antiquities dealers over there, which, have a pseudo legal system that lets them sell these sorts of things. And of course, Ahmed Kuzo here at ACOR has also done quite a bit of work on understanding what is happening with the illicit trafficking and the steps that we can take to help prevent that. But, I think a lot of this it has to come down to educating and helping the population understand that the real value of artifacts and archaeology is understanding the heritage of the country and the global cultural heritage that we all share in. And for whatever little bit of money they may be able to make off of a pot or a coin, it's not really worth it in the end.
Are you involved with the photo archive of ACOR?
No, not personally. I mean, I'm aware of it, and I speak with the people all the time, but no, I'm not personally connected with that.
What are your plans in coming months? Let's say 2023 and early 2024.
Well, we've got, of course, we're really waiting and hoping that the finalized MOU goes through soon so that we can start expanding the national inventory beyond just the building of ACOR. So, unfortunately, at the moment, just the bureaucratic process has been one that's made it very difficult for us to get everything together and be able to have the permissions and the rights and authority to go into a museum and say, we're here to implement this system and help you get your collection online. But we expect that to be done very soon. So I imagine, the second half of this year is really going to be focused on really getting the national inventory into museums once we have that official MOU done, which from what we hear should be done fairly soon. At the same time, of course, the work that we're doing in Abdoun with the community archaeology project, that will continue through until the beginning of October. And, we're very excited with that. I think we've had already about 60 people involved with the project who come through as volunteers. And that's just been in our first season of the year. So we hope that we'll see something similar in the second half and really be able to expose a lot of people to archaeology.
Can you say more about the Abdoun project?
Yeah.
As far as I know, it's a site from Iron Age, Ammonite site, and you have a team of volunteers. Some of them are our mutual acquaintances and friends. How that project is developed?
So this is again one of the joys that come from Jihad Haroon. He's always thinking about how we can really connect the community to archaeology, and this was one of those things that he came up with. So just stepping back before we talk about the site itself, talking about the motivation and the idea of it. If someone wants to excavate today, there's quite a process you have to go through. You have to submit security forms to the Department of Antiquities. Usually you're talking about a commitment of, several weeks to be involved in a project, and probably some sort of financial commitment to it as well. So together with the Department of Antiquities, we came up with this particular project, which allows us to invite people So Acor is responsible for inviting those people to come to the site. We advertise it, we allow people to sign up and apply to become a volunteer, and then we invite them to join us for a day-long experience in archaeology, which people just can't do otherwise. So it makes for a really incredible opportunity that people can actually just get an opportunity to get a taste for what archaeology is, to know what the process is like, to experience it together with professional archaeologists. So we invite people to come out. We spend about 4 hours with them in the field. We go through the methodology. We talk about what the site is. We talk about what questions we're trying to answer. And then we involve them in the process of archaeology and in the process of helping us to answer those questions. Now, the site itself is becoming more and more interesting as we're excavating. It certainly appears that in the beginning of the Iron Age, we have one large structure. I mean, and again, I emphasize these are my current hypotheses, and as we continue to excavate, we'll understand more. But it appears that we at least have an early phase that might be just a singular solitary tower that's out there, and again, maybe just used for storing food or grain or whatever it might be from the product of the agricultural fields around. Then it seems that later on in the Iron Age, the entire site expands. So we get, a gate system, we get casemate walls, and it becomes a much bigger site. But what's most interesting right now is it appears that we have a Byzantine occupation that comes a little later on. So we're turning up a lot of Byzantine pottery right now. We have what appears to be a collapsed arch in one of the corners that we're now slowly starting to excavate that building and reveal that. And of course, when we think about just over the wadi on the other side, we have that Byzantine press that's right over there. So these sites would have seen each other. So if we have two contemporary Byzantine sites, they may have had some sort of related activity. So it's really exciting to see what's happening with that. But then we have this mystery at the site that I'm excited to continue to reveal. But we have a Hellenistic ashlar sat in the middle of the wall. And it's literally between the remnants of the Iron Age, one of the Iron Age gateways in the site there. So it's exactly in the middle of it. And it appears to be in situ. So one of our initial theories was that maybe we had a small Hellenistic building there. And when, the people who built the final sheep pen wall of the site saw this beautiful big block and said, oh, we'll just drag that over here, set it up. It's a big block. That's less work for us to do. Except as we've gone down and now we've exposed the foundation of it, and we can see that it is actually intentionally installed where it is now. So, it's a huge question, and it's too early to speculate as to what it might be. But the reality is that we have a really big mystery there of this Hellenistic stone, which appears to be an installation in some building. It's probably installed there by the Byzantine occupants because it's right in that area. But what they were doing with it and why they had it there, stay tuned. That's something I'm really hoping that we'll reveal before the end of the year.
What happens with other projects? Because Acor has Temple of the Winged Lions. They have Amman Citadel, then Beit Ras, Khirbet Salam, and Madaba, the Petra Church.
So
Of
and of course, all of these projects are ongoing projects. So something like the Temple of the Winged Lions, we're on a very focused publication phase right now. So we've got a lot of the various experts and specialists who are working on different things. We have one of the people right now here at Acor who's working on the faunal remains. We've had someone earlier in the year who was working on some of the pottery. So we have people going through and working on different things, working on the publication. So we are hoping to see the final publications for TWL coming out in the near future. Likewise with Beit Ross, there's ongoing work with that. There's some of the publications that are looking to come out with that, as well as the continued discussions of how does that site progress. How do we engage the public with what's at Beit Ross without compromising the site there. It's an incredibly delicate site inside. And so, hopefully at the same time, though, we can find a way to really give someone the experience of being inside the site, seeing the facade, seeing the frescoes that are in there, which is such an incredible unique and marvelous site, and hopefully begins to really tell the story of what's happening there in Beit Ras. You know, it has to be something special, and we have, of course, now a significant amount of written remains because of that tomb that can hopefully inform how we understand the other remains around Beit Ras. As to the other, you know, ongoing ACOR projects, you know, there's always things in flux, always things in movement. But I would say, you know, probably some of the stuff I see the most of right now is really, you know, the publication phase for TWL. We do get people coming in and out all the time right now who are focusing on trying to get those publications out the door.
Are you planning new lectures for the fall of 2023?
I believe so. I don't know that I'm the right person to answer that, but yeah, I believe that the
I
idea
mean,
is to
you're an
continue on with the lecture
insider.
series.
You definitely know more than me.
I do, but you know, honestly, I don't know what the idea is now. I know that summer is just such a busy period; it's hard to get the lectures through. But you know, I imagine that once things kind of calm down and get back into the normal routine, we'll see the same thing again. We'll have our fall and our spring lecture series, hopefully.
And for the end, can you say more about the preservation of cultural heritage or lost heritage by using different technological tools and different gadgets? What's your
You know,
experience
this
on
is,
this?
of course, this is my area of
Of
speciality.
course.
You know, it's my expertise, and it's something that I get very passionate about. But I would always say that we have to always contextualize when we talk about the applications of new technology to cultural heritage. The technology has to be at the service of cultural heritage. It's not just that, oh, we're excited to use something new. It's flashy. It's got, you know, pretty buttons, whatever it is, makes nice pictures. For example, it's incredibly risky when we talk about 3D documentation. You know, people get so excited about it. Wow, we have the perfect geometry captured for a site. Yeah, sure, we have the perfect geometry, but that doesn't give us the material information. That doesn't necessarily perfectly, you know, capture all of the color or the layers or anything else. It's just the geometry. So we have to always remember this, that we cannot compromise the conservation and protection of the sites themselves just through the documentation, but rather see that the documentation can become the platform, the launching pad for managing cultural heritage, for managing sites, and helping us to do that in a way that we can't just simply do through sketches or through drawings or through photographs. You know, 3D documentation becomes the basis for everything else that we can do, but we have to treat it as another tool and not the thing that just ends everything else. It's certainly the most powerful tool in our toolkit today. Between laser scanning and photogrammetry, we shouldn't ever be approaching site conservation without these tools as part of that process. Um, but again, we can't just think about 3D documentation and say, we're done, site's preserved, but rather instead seeing it as a way for us to really holistically understand what's happening at a site where we may need to address particular changes. You know, we get now the ability to measure millimeter level differences on the site. So if we went and scanned to the same site 2 years in a row, and all of a sudden we're saying like, oh wow, this one thing is moving out of place, it gives us that ability to shift it where we may not actually be able to see that otherwise. So it's incredibly important that we're using these tools, but again, we have to remember they're not there to replace traditional preservation and conservation techniques, which we still need to rely on.
Do you want to add something at the end?
I would just say the same thing. Like, you know, I highly encourage everyone who's coming through Jordan or here in Jordan already to stop by ACOR, come visit us. The library is still an amazing, excellent place to work. We have incredibly fast internet, so it's great place to really handle some of the more difficult tasks that we have. We're always interested in engaging and talking with people about any questions or, you know, concerns around cultural heritage in the area, and certainly you know, always interested in whatever new collaborations may be born out of such conversations. So our doors are open, and we look forward to welcoming anyone here at the center.
How many books and publications acre has. I mean, in
Some
7, 8 years ago, when I wrote a feature article about acre, it was like 50,000 books and
Yeah,
periodicals.
50,000 is the same number that I've heard, but I'm
Yeah.
sure it's probably grown beyond that now. So maybe, it's more like 60,000 at this point. But it's one of the things that hopefully I can actually get some more proper metrics on it and actually be able to measure that on a regular basis, because I think that is something important for us to continually monitor and understand.
I'm looking forward to seeing you at ACOR maybe tomorrow, because I haven't been there for a while.
Yeah,
I finished
come on down.
with this seminar on heritage and archaeology. It was fine, and there were lots of interesting papers by PhD candidates and students.
Mm.
So I'm planning to visit ACOR tomorrow or during this week. We'll keep in touch, and we're going to talk about other projects that you were involved with in Jordan, because you've been digging here since 2004. So this is the first
Yeah, really
conversations, and I'm planning to talk about your field work in the second episode.
fantastic. Well, yeah, definitely. If you have a chance, come by tomorrow.
I'll come
I should be in
tomorrow.
the building all day
Yeah, yeah.
tomorrow. Yep,
I have nothing else to do,
and we'll look
so
forward to seeing you.
tomorrow I'm definitely visiting you guys. I should use the momentum.
Fantastic.
I should use the momentum, and we should definitely talk more. Thank you for your time, and see you tomorrow.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, and we'll be in touch. We'll see you tomorrow, I
We
hope.
will.
Take care,
All the
my friend.
best. Bye
All
bye.
right. Bye bye.